The first time I'm doing a Zoom AGM, and I'm sure, like most of you, this has become the new norm, technology willing, of course. So something different for all of us. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Karen Dowman, the chair of the Board of Trustees. And with the support of my fellow trustees, I'll be taking you through a very busy year for Black Country Women's Aid. Can I just remind you that this is the year ending March 2019, not the year we're currently in. So a few housekeeping. If no one objects, we're going to record this event and we'll put it on YouTube and our website. For those that have been unable to be here today, our communications officer, Annika Spalding, will be leading on our social media. So please add to it by tweeting #HarvestSuccess. Make it a live event that is shared as widely as possible. If you have any questions, please write in the chat box and we'll take note and respond after the meeting. Your mics and videos will be muted and turned off so that you can see the presentation clearly. Okay.
I've lost her, you.
Karen, you're muted.
Okay, how long? I'm covering housekeeping now.
So we got mics and videos will be turned off.
Okay. So I think we're ready to go. And before I share our year with you, we've got some thoughts from our partners. Partnerships are a vital part of our work, so let's hear from them.
Hi everybody, I'm sure there are a lot of new faces in this virtual crowd since my time at Black Country Women's Aid, so I'll introduce myself first. My name is Laura Rogers and I work for West Midlands Police. I have the absolute pleasure of knowing the organisation on several different levels and having nothing but positive things to say about Black Country Women's Aid. My journey started when you were known as Sandwell Women's Aid back in 2012. I was a service user who'd landed in Sandwell with a 10-month-old baby and a truckload of baggage. I had an allocated IDFA in my hometown in Cambridgeshire for 9 months before I got here to the Black Country, but she had never called me and had never been to my house. And within just a couple of days of self-referring, I had Deb Worth sat on my sofa, and she was wonderful. I felt heard for the first time. She gave me some fabulous advice and she really, really inspired me. And it was really fun that I started to think about a career in the world of domestic abuse, and the journey began. So I spent 3 years of that journey as an employee at Black Country Women's Aid, nestled very much in the bosom of an army of truly the most beautiful, fierce and wonderful women that I've ever known. And I grew so much in that time. I was being paid to do a job, but the reality is that I was also receiving 3 years of free nurturing and counselling from colleagues who became friends and advocates as I was continuing to navigate my own journey in the background. You can't do it alone. I was very, very fortunate to have so many people supporting me. If I were to talk any more about that, I would just cry because they mean so much to me. They know who they are and what they did for me, and I'm thrilled to know that that support is available to so many more women who come through the doors in the future. So moving on, let's talk about Black Country Women's Aid today. One of our key partners in tackling the ever-rising levels of domestic abuse both in the Black Country and beyond. And there's a Roald Dahl quote: if you have thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams and you will always look lovely. And there couldn't be a quote more fitting for this workforce. It suits everybody in every role. Lots of faces, big hearts in abundance, housed by strong, intelligent women who are noisy as they advocate for change, and above all, advocate for victims in a way that makes me really proud to know you. The organisation grows from strength to strength, and no matter the scale of the projects, the growing size of the workforce, the core message doesn't change. The feeling of being home and being safe remains in reach for any service user crossing your threshold, whether that's contact with your amazing CEO all the way through to your frontline workers and volunteers. You make the difference. For me, you made the difference, and I wouldn't be in the role as head of safeguarding for West Midlands Police now if I hadn't been so loved and so supported when I needed it. So it's just a message to say, I know things are difficult right now. They're always difficult in our world. We're here because we recognise that and want to be the difference. Demand is high, remote working is difficult, COVID is difficult, but you are so needed. So please keep going and just keep doing what you're doing. I couldn't be happier. I'm proud of you.
Hi, my name is Barry Cole and I'm a COG manager for Sandwell Children's Trust and I work in the Smethwick area of the borough. I'd just like to take a couple of minutes just to talk to you about the work of Black Country Women's Aid. We've had an IDVA based with us at Smethwick COG for about 2 years now, and we can't speak highly enough of the value that that's brought to us as a team in the way in which we've brought together both services to be able to really affect the lives of our children and young people in the area that we serve, doing joint visits, working joint cases, attending meetings. It's been absolutely vital to the work that we've done, so we're really appreciative of that. In terms of the strategic importance and contribution that the Black Country Women's Aid makes to the Trust, I'm sure there are people who are far more eminently qualified to talk about that than me, but certainly from my aspect, the work that's done in MASH and in SPOC in terms of the screening stuff that comes through is absolutely vital and contributes significantly to our agenda here in the Trust. I mean, particularly when you look at the surge during the lockdown of referrals that we received that had a domestic violence component, it's absolutely vital that we continue to work together to improve our services and to improve the lives and our responses to families that suffer domestic violence. I think that in the future we should continue to work in the way that we have done, maybe look at strengthening, certainly for us, in terms of the targeted services and early help agenda, making sure that we're able to respond early to families who identify with domestic violence concerns, perhaps that haven't even reached the point at which they need to be screened in any particular way. And maybe it's just when we're working with families, we can have that input from IDVAs in that way. That would be wonderful. But we've had really good service and it's been a really good partnership, really fruitful partnership, and long may it continue.
Hello everyone, my name is Mary Rose Lapp and I'm the Domestic Abuse Team Manager at Sandwell Council. I'm really pleased to be able to say a few words at today's AGM. I'm probably showing my age now, but I've known Black Country Women's Aid for many moons during my time working on community safety and domestic abuse issues in Sandwell. In my current role, I've commissioned community-based support to domestic abuse and sexual violence victims, and Black Country Women's Aid provide that support. They also provide the Domestic Abuse Refuge Service in Sandwell. But they're not an organisation to rest on their laurels, and they're always striving to improve and extend their services and do as much as they can to offer much needed support to victims of domestic abuse, sexual violence, stalking and harassment, modern slavery and child sexual exploitation. And that's victims who are both adults and child victims. Part of my job is also to support and coordinate Sandwell's Domestic Abuse Strategic Partnership, usually known as DASP. I'm sure you're all aware of the importance of a coordinated community response to domestic abuse, and having an effective partnership working on these issues is vital. No one organisation can do this work alone, and it's important that all partners work together. I think we do have an effective partnership in Sandwell, and Black Country Women's Aid are a really key partner in the Sandwell DASP. They're involved with just about every aspect of the work and are always keen to engage and challenge both themselves and us as a wider partnership to do more and to develop new partnerships and explore new ways of working to address the complex issues we all work with. Not only do they provide that much needed specialist provision for victims, They've also worked closely with us to bring additional resources into Sandwell so we can do more to support local victims and their families. Women's Aid also provide a really important voice for victims, and we all need to listen to victims and ensure we respond to what victims are telling us. It's important that what we're doing is making a difference and is having a positive impact with victims and families. So I'd like to thank Black Country Women's Aid for all the work they do in Sandwell and wish them all the best as we enter another year of working together in partnership.
Hi, my name's Deb Ward and I manage the Adult Safeguarding Board in Sandwell. Black Country Women's Aid are one of our key partners and they work with us to ensure that, one, we understand the prevalence of domestic abuse as it relates to men and women with needs for care and support, and that those individuals that need their support are appropriately safeguarded.
Hello everybody, my name's Kim Medill and I'm currently Chief Superintendent in the Dudley Borough. I'm making this video in relation to Black Country Women's Aid and how we work really closely together to make sure that we can safeguard victims and their children of domestic abuse. I've worked with Black Country Women's Aid for many years, so I used to be the domestic abuse lead for the whole of West Midlands Police, and during that time built a really strong relationship between policing and this service, and I've maintained that for many years. I've recently been working in Warsaw, where that relationship continued, and it's really important because obviously the police have got certain powers where we can come and arrest perpetrators for offences around domestic abuse, but we know how difficult it is for victims to come to policing, and they often call us at a crisis point. But actually, what Black Country Women's Aid bring and the service of an IDVA, an independent domestic violence advisor, is someone who can give all of the advice that's needed to a domestic abuse victim, help them with safety planning and what their options are, because there are many options for victims to flee abuse. And of course, the police are here to support anybody and will take action against perpetrators because this really is an abhorrent crime. But we need to work in partnership because there are many different things that victims of abuse need. And I'm really proud to work very closely with Black Country Women's Aid and all of the fantastic work they do to support victims and children and families across the whole of the Black Country.
We have some more to show you at the end of the AGM, so please stay on and watch them if you have the time. And I want to thank everyone who contributed recordings, video clips. We wanted to show them all, but time would not allow. However, we will make sure they're shared with all of you. Before I begin going through the trustee report, I want to pay tribute to a fellow board member who sadly passed away in January this year. Janet had been a feature of the Sandwell charity sector for many years. We first knew of Janet as a district manager of Citizens Advice Bureau, now called Sandwell Citizens Advice, and as chair of the Black Country Housing Group, who provided us with some refuge accommodation. She provided a wealth of experience, advice and guidance to the charity, and her sudden passing in January was a shock to us all. As an environmental campaigner, we'll be dedicating our memorial garden to her as a space for reflection and nature. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. I formally thank Janet for her long service and commitment to the work of Black Country Women's Aid. This year is a tribute to Janet and all those that work within Black Country Women's Aid and all those that continue to support this vital work. This time last year, I spoke about us being a part of the Black Country infrastructure for many years. We'd hoped to celebrate the year ending with something that you would have been part of. Who knew that we would look like this, or that the year ended making plans to deal with coronavirus lockdown and redesigning services to ensure that people who needed us get the help and support they need. We'll share interesting reflections next year on a very different year for Black Country Women's Aid and the country as a whole. 1920 seems such a long time ago, and one where business as normal is something that we can only dream about now. But as with many years I've been a trustee of Black Country Women's Aid, I know that they can respond to anything and anyone. I continue to see an ambitious, dynamic charity that hasn't lost any of its enthusiasm, energy and ambition to help women and children experience violence and abuse. As of today, we've just over 150 staff, 6 new apprentices, and we're supported by over 600 volunteer hours during the year, with everyone all committed to delivering services to people who have experienced violence and abuse. I'm proud that we have a good reputation of delivering high quality services, and recently received accreditation from sector leads such as the Women's Aid Federation of England and Wales, and we're part of a pilot project with CQC, Care Quality Commission, assessing services for victims of modern slavery. We continue to build on these standards, and as we're working to achieve accreditation meeting ISO standards in quality management, information security, health and safety, business continuity, and environmental management. Being a trustee can be a challenging position as we lead on the strategic vision of the organisation, hold all the risks, and agree the rules governing the organisation. This year saw 25% growth in the organisation. As trustees, we look closely into new funds to ensure that they are targeted and meet the contracted commissioned requirements. We take pride in 80% of our funds going directly to the delivery of services, and we review management costs regularly to ensure that our support services remain our priority. As trustees, we've looked into the quality and skill sets of the management team and are very proud to have some highly skilled and competent managers dedicated to the delivery of high quality services. All go above and beyond to ensure that services are delivered, meeting people's needs. What is also important is that there is a good challenge and constructive debate. We never rest on our laurels, but strive always to be better. We're also proud that many of our ex-employees have gone on to vital strategic roles within the region, influencing regional and national policy. We heard from one of our ex-colleagues, Laura Rogers, earlier. I apologise for the sound. Who now leads safeguarding for West Midlands Police. We're very proud of all our staff and the work that they do to help and support victims of violence and abuse. Sadly, I don't have the time to do this year justice, so this is only a snapshot of the challenges and successes of the year. You will have access to our annual report and accounts, where I write a detailed trustee report, and our annual report will be circulated to all partners after this meeting. So here are some of the headlines. Black Country continues to make a significant contribution to the partnerships across the 4 Black Country authorities, Sandwell, Dudley, Walsall and Wolverhampton, influencing strategic and operational development. We continue to work with other specialist services across the region to ensure that services are coordinated and meet the highest standards. The organisation has continued its partnership work with other specialist providers and is now integral to the following consortia: National Stalking, Specialist Domestic Violence and Abuse, Rape and Sexual Violence Consortium, the Women's Justice Partnership, and other voluntary sector partnerships supporting vulnerable people. This approach continues to demonstrate that agencies cannot work in isolation, but are always stronger together, as our previous video showed. Our Chief Executive contributes to thematic discussions on domestic abuse, modern slavery, and stalking at the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner Victims Commission. Much of the year, she worked hard to ensure that services across the Black Country were represented and funding is secured. The approach remains integral to the future of specialist services as we continue to face many challenges. We continue to be proactive in providing local, regional, and national feedback on the domestic abuse bill and other policies and legislative changes. We also continue to work with the Salvation Army and 11 partners across England and Wales, challenging local responses, improving systems and services for victims of modern day slavery. During the year, Black Country Women's Aid celebrated 10 years as a member of the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network. As one of the original members, this partnership has gone on from strength to strength, and we are grateful for their attendance and presentation at our AGM today. Black Country Women's Aid continues to work hard to secure contracts and commissions, identify new collaborations and funding streams. During the year, we applied to the Heart of England Foundation Trust for a capital bid to develop a multi-purpose space for victims of modern slavery. After a thorough and vigorous process, we were announced as one of 3 successful organisations in the West Midlands region to build our new facilities for vulnerable people. We look forward to the first dig in 2021. We believe that this valuable resource will help many female victims of exploitation receive the care and support they need after being refused it. It will be here that we meet and dedicate the Memorial Garden to Janet Ailiff. Black Country Women's Aid is supported by the community as increased awareness of the plight of victims of abuse is disseminated across the region. Partnerships, media campaigns, using all platforms available to reach people are used and make a significant impact on communities wanting to help with this vital work. The community fundraising team expanded during this year to work with many committed people and organisations who support the work that we do. Our supporters' generosity comes in both financial support as well as essential items such as clothing, toiletries, startup kits for new mothers, and any call outs for help when someone we support has very little on arrival into the refuge. Black Country Women's Aid is committed to the delivery of high quality services that ensure funders of the standards that we adopt across all services and demonstrates value for money. Regular internal strategic and operational reviews enable all services to remain relevant, victim focused, and of high quality internal and external performance management. The review ensures that services are delivered in accordance with contract or funders' requirements. Also during the year, we supported 9,500 people. This can be broken down into the following numbers: 6,148 victims of domestic abuse living within the community, 290 women and their children needing refuge accommodation, 607 victims of stalking, 245 victims of modern day slavery and international human trafficking, 717 children and young people affected by abuse, including domestic abuse, rape and sexual violence and exploitation, 683 victims of rape and childhood rape and sexual abuse, 441 women who were in the criminal justice system for offences, many who presented with complex needs such as substance misuse, mental health issues, homelessness, and involved in sex work. The organisation also delivered over 400 hours of counselling through our therapeutic services and was supported with over 600 hours of volunteer work. Black Country Women's Aid is now embedded across the Black Country and Birmingham. This has enabled anyone who has experienced abuse to get help and support. Here are some of the spaces that we work in. The Cedar Centres with bases in Sandwell, Dudley, Walsall and Birmingham. Our one-door access to all services approach means that from the first conversation, they have access to all the help, support they need. We're working towards a seamless service for all the victims. Multi-agency safeguarding hubs, MASH, receive referrals from our social care partners. At GP practices, delivering the National Identification and Referral to Improve Safety, the IRIS programme. A GP practice-based model providing training and education, clinical inquiry care pathways, and an enhanced referral pathway to specialist domestic violence services. Some spaces is also used for counselling with clients. Within sexual health clinics, this is in its infancy, but a vital space for victims of rape, sexual abuse to help and support. At accident and emergency departments based within Sandwell and West Birmingham Hospitals Trust and Russell's Hall Hospital Trust provide specialist advocates, identify victims presenting with multiple injuries as a result of all forms of abuse. With substance misuse services working particularly within the Sandwell Blue Light Project, and we're part of the multi-agency operational group to ensure a joint identification and ownership of the highest impact clients, both as victims and perpetrators of abuse. And within the early help hubs, working at a local level with a range of professional supporting victims working together in local communities to help keep them safe. In primary and secondary schools where children have been identified through the police notifications, Black Country Women's Aid has worked with West Midlands Police, representing all the local authorities in the West Midlands to secure funds to support children and young people. With My Time, a national provider commissioned to deliver interventions to perpetrators of abuse, we work in a partnership to drive and develop programmes. We offer parallel support to victims and children where the offender is engaged in perpetrator programmes. We also work at the Magistrate and Crown Courts, where we work with witness care support services. This daunting experience is supported by advocates where necessary, ensuring special measures are put in place and just being there sometimes, just hand-holding during difficult times for our victims. Within local probation officers and local custody suites, where our women justice workers deliver some of the support services to female offenders, we also welcome probation officers within Black Country Women's Aid spaces as an alternative area to work from and to be together to support women. On the streets of the Black Country, our work with street homeless women, sex workers, and those threatened with homelessness has brought us out and about supporting local women wherever they are. This reach out is important as some women struggle to access services in the traditional way. We've been working with a number of academics, researching into supporting victims by gaining a greater insight into perpetrators' behaviour and using different risk assessment tools. Our partnership with Dr. Jane Monckton-Smith is invaluable as we gain greater insight into stalking behaviours that enhance the support and safeguard to victims. I've only covered a snapshot of this year's work, and I encourage you to read our annual report that provides some of the detail and supports this summary. I haven't covered the financial aspects of the year, so can I now introduce you to the Black Country Women's Aid Head of Strategic Finance, Amy Parker, and Caris Ford from Copia Wealth and Tax to go through the 2019-20 accounts. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I'm Caris Ford of Copia Wealth and Tax. We're the auditors for Black Country Women's Aid. So why do we need an audit? The Charities Act states that charities with income of greater than £1 million require an audit, and therefore Black Country Women's Aid are required to have an audit. Charities must be open and transparent about the money they receive and what they spend it on. There's no such thing as a profit in a charity. Any surpluses need to be accounted for, and the surpluses must be used to meet charitable objectives. Charities must adhere to specific accounting standards and have systems in place to manage all the funds that pass through the charity. Charities must have an auditor who will obtain evidence about all financial transactions. Every penny must be accounted for. Our work focuses on income recognition and confirming that expenditure is within charitable objectives and within the terms of grants and contracts. The Board of Trustees are responsible for the overall strategic finances and must sign off the audited accounts. The audited accounts will be submitted by the 31st of December 20. There has been an extension from Companies House this year due to COVID, but they will be filed by the 31st of December as normal this year.
Hi, so I'm Amy Parker of Black Country Women's Aid, and I'm just going to go through the financial review with you. So Black Country Women's Aid income has increased by 25% for the financial year 1920, from 4.3 million to 5.4 million. Please note that 11% of this increase is a reflection of the capital grant that we've received from Heart of England for £477,000 for the Karen House project, which is the purchase of the property.
So if she's doing a test.
Okay, so BCWA continues to realise its longer term plan to diversify funds away from the statutory funding and has been able to attract new funding streams to support existing services and take on new projects. The statement of financial activities show an increase of funds from 964,000. Our reserves now stand at 2.2 million, of which 658,000 is restricted and 1.6 million is unrestricted. The balance of unrestricted reserves includes 397,000 relating to fixed assets and 631,000 is designated to meet future commitments. Therefore, the balance of reserves is 606,000. The Board of Trustees has agreed to support a 3-year strategy that includes a strategic development fund, where the organisation undertakes research and development to inform future service provisions and secure additional funds for longer term service delivery cost of 88,000. Excuse me. Service Continuity Fund, where the organisation maintains costs for closure for 6 months running costs of 493,000. The Property Contingency Fund is where the organisation has to ensure sufficient funds to maintain the property to meet required standards and to also prepare for a business continuity plan for major structural damage of 50,000.
The audit findings for 1920 were, in our opinion, the financial statements of Black Country Women's Aid give a true and fair view of the state of the charitable company's affairs as at 31st of March 2020 and of its incoming resources and application of resources, including its income and expenditure for the year then ended.
Thank you, Karen. Karen, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought you'd got a 4th slide. Thank you, Amy and Caris. At our final audit meeting, we spent time talking about the increases in the funding and the complexity of contracts and commissioning. For us as trustees, it's vital that we have good systems for accounting and that have external oversight and validation. At our regular finance committees, we scrutinise the contracts and finance and the challenges challenge both the CEO and head of finance. We are confident that we take appropriate risks with all our funds for the benefit of the people we are here to serve. It's important, this is one of the key roles of trustees, and it's extremely important that we're able to have an audit approval process at the end of each year. Okay, moving on. The next stage brings us to the end of the first part of the annual general meeting, and we move on to the election of trustees. For this part, I'll ask Sarah Ward, Black Country Women's Aid CEO, to lead the proceedings. Welcome, Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. I can't see myself, so I'm hoping you can all see me. So good morning, good to see you all. Even though I can't see you all, I can certainly hear some of you who didn't turn off your mics or had your cameras on to begin with, but that was lovely to see you. We're all getting used to this Zoom or Teams meeting, so this is a bit of a first for us. So at this stage in the proceedings, I will ask all of the board members to stand down for election. So our trustees have worked really hard during certainly challenging times, and I think you'll see from our annual, the trustees report and the annual accounts that we've had a very, very challenging year. That's not without, its successes, and you've seen, I think one of the biggest successes was the purchase of the property, our first capital purchase. So our trustees have worked hard, and we've certainly challenged them, and they've challenged us. And so it's a tough order to be a trustee. So I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the trustees for all of their hard work and commitment, and certainly being at the end of an email or asking them to respond very quickly as things have changed throughout the year. So I do want to take this opportunity on behalf of myself and all of the management and the staff to say a big thank you. So our trustees have stood down. What we'll do at this meeting is that we will only elect members, and we won't agree key positions such as the chair or the vice chair. What we're going to do is we're going to use our first formal meeting of the new elected trustees to sort that out. What we're also going to do is we're going to use the opportunity to advertise for new board members within the new year as part of our sort of strengthening accountability plan. And I think previously you would have seen our previous strategies around strengthening the organisation infrastructure. We've seen the fruits of that for this year, and certainly in our accounts. So if I can ask for the nominations list to be put up, please, Rebecca. So the nominations for the Board of Trustees are Karen Dowman, Malvina Anderson, Rosanna Benton, Vicky Harris, and Salma Ali. If I can ask somebody to second those nominations in the notes box, then our scribe, which is Tracy Alexander, will note that second. Thank you. Okay, so I think we've had a second for that. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Neil. Okay, so the next part of the formal proceedings is the appointment of the auditors. Again, what we do is we make sure that we have a competitive quote. We don't just assume that Copia Wealth and Tax continue with that. But the trustees have considered and made recommendations to appoint Copia Wealth and Tax as auditors for the financial year 2020-21. And I look forward to somebody to second that proposal. If I can ask you to do that in the chat box again, please. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to hand you back to Karen, because this really is the end of the formal events of an annual general meeting. You're free to put any comments that we will respond to after the meeting about it, and any questions, and we'll forward on the annual report following this event. Thank you. Back over to Karen.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We're now going to have a couple of presentations. And the first one is from Amber Cagney. Amber is the development manager of the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network. This time last year, we were celebrating 10 years, as I mentioned earlier, of the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network. And we thought it would be a fitting tribute to the work of the network and its growing partnership as we enter into the eve of new Home Office modern slavery contract. Welcome, Amber.
Thank you for having me. Brill. So thank you for having me, and thank you, Karen, for mentioning us earlier on in your speech as well. And we're really glad to be here at your AGM just to celebrate everything that you've achieved this year. I'm really glad to have been a part of it. So those of you who don't know who we are, so we are the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network. And we are a network of agencies that work in partnership to tackle modern slavery in the West Midlands and beyond. And our aims are to develop and maintain an effective regional multi-agency anti-slavery network, to raise awareness, reduce the threat and harm, and rescue and support survivors of modern slavery, human trafficking and exploitation, and also to develop strategic partnerships and collaborations with other regional, national and international organisations to tackle modern slavery and exploitation. Black Country Women's Aid, as mentioned previously, are a really key partner in our work and have been for the last 10 years since we started this area of work. And that has only developed and grown over the last 10 years. And it's incredible to see the number of people that Black Country Women's Aid support and the significant difference that you make across the region. Just to give a bit of background on where what we all do together sit. So Black Country Women's Aid and our organisation together, we often represent modern slavery in our regions at strategic boards. The region now has a violence reduction unit, and that is managed by the Police and Crime Commissioner. And sitting under that, feeding into the VRU and jointly managed to cover all the different vulnerabilities, they're divided into 4 different boards. So as you can see there is the West Midlands Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery Board that West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network and Black Country Women's Aid sit and represent their service user groups on. And I'm sure that there's a number of those other boards that Black Country Women's Aid will be sitting and representing on as well. So it's not just about the survivors that they represent and work with, but they're also influencing strategy across the whole of the West Midlands as well. Our connection is with Black Country Women's Aid on the Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery Board. We sit on that, and the Modern Slavery Board also has the 7 local authority leads for all the different areas in the West Midlands, DWP, Salvation Army, and the whole host of other organisations. Each board has a deputy chair, and Robin Briley, our executive director, is deputy chair of the Modern Slavery Board. They meet quarterly, and each chair feeds into each other. Each board has its own action plan, and our organisation and Black Country Women's Aid are actively involved in that action plan to make sure that where those boards and those actions are representative of the needs of survivors in our region. Each local authority partnership has their own anti-slavery partnership. Some are stronger than others, and I think Black Country definitely have got some really strong anti-slavery partnerships. I know Sandwell is definitely represented in a lot of awards and recognition for the work that they do there. And just to give you an idea of the significance of the West Midlands within the anti-slavery movement, there was a recent report released by Justice and Care, and the West Midlands was very much referenced as almost a country of its own, with best practice and very much leading the way on this. So we are so glad that Black Country Women's Aid are recognised nationally as well as regionally for the significant work that they do. If you can go into the next slide, please. So just a bit of information about those boards and what they do. So the Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking Board, it leads on a number of regional priorities, increasing information sharing between organisations so that we can better understand this issue of modern slavery and respond to it, making sure that vulnerable people are kept safe and prevented from being exploited, making sure that they have access to the right services across the West Midlands. So again, to be able to hear the growth of Black Country Women's Aid is really important in making sure that more survivors are able to be kept safe. We're also working on ensuring that training is available to everybody, no matter their role, to be able to spot the signs and indicators of slavery so that people can be identified earlier. Really keen on developing a multi-agency response to prevention, focusing on both offenders and victims, disruption, ensuring the appropriate use of the national referral mechanism, which is where Black Country Women's Aid sit within, and again, learning from other areas of the country and sharing good practice. Next slide, please. So just a bit of information about what modern slavery sector looks like within our region. So Black Country Women's Aid are an NRM subcontractor within the National Referral Mechanism, and St John of God is also one that sits within our region. But there's a whole host of other projects that interlink with the work that you do. So there's pre-NRM services such as ourselves, the Red Cross and Louise Brown's work, who I know she'll be speaking later on in this session, who's doing some incredible work with survivors of sexual exploitation. And then a lot of post-NRM projects. And Black Country Women's Aid and ourselves, we work really closely with all of these different organisations And on the front line, what that looks like realistically is referrals between each other and supporting with the transition of survivors into different services that meet their needs as appropriate. Next slide, please. So some of the work that we do, that Black Country Women's Aid work closely with, a particular one is our Survivor Care and Support Services Working Group. And there's one meeting that always stands out for me that Black Country Women's Aid was involved in this year. I think it was Bali that was there representing your organisation. And Black Country Women's Aid are in a position where they have a lot of knowledge and expertise working on this area of work day in, day out. And they offer a great deal of support to other support organisations within our region. And there was one meeting where Bali offered help to other services that didn't quite know how the victim care contract worked, how processes worked, and that just seeing that joined up working in practice, not only at a strategic level, but also on like a really frontline practical level. That's just absolutely what partnership is all about, just helping each other out regardless of what organisation you're from. We also have a language and media working group, the strategic board, as I mentioned, the West Midlands Organised Immigration, Crime and Modern Slavery Board. We represent modern slavery on the PCC's Victims Commission, which Black Country Women's Aid also sit on. We've just started developing a slavery adult safeguarding conference, which we hope that Black Country Women's Aid will be featuring prominently in, and we're really excited for that piece of work in the future. The National Network Coordinators Forum, the Modern Slavery Strategy Implementation Group, and NRM Transformation. And again, always working really closely together on those. Next slide, please. So to the future, we are really excited to hear more about the victim care contract expansion for Black Country Women's Aid, and especially around your new project and new building. We're really looking forward to hearing how that works, and hope that it brings future opportunities for us to work together closely as large organisations in our region. We're also hoping to have growth and expansion in the next year. And again, there's going to be even more opportunities to be working together and just continuing to secure our place as being seen as a region for good practice in the country. That's, I think, we should be really proud of that name that we are getting for ourselves in our region. And it's absolutely down to the significant amount of work that's put into partnership working, not only on that strategic level, but those frontline workers that are doing the work with survivors day in, day out and making a real difference. So thank you.
Thank you, Amber. That was lovely, and thank you for your very kind words about us. You've given us an excellent insight into the work of anti-slavery, and we're proud to be one of your original partners, and we'll work to support all victims in the West Midlands. As we move on, as Amber said, the second presentation is from our own Louise Brown, Slavery Engagement Manager. Louise is funded by the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and a role that has evolved in line with the increasing awareness of modern slavery and this abhorrent crime. I've invited her to share with you some of the work that she does across the region as a completion to the work that Amber has already gone through. Louise, are you there?
I'm here. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Well done.
Great. Okay, it's a good start. Okay, I'm really delighted to be speaking to you today about the engagement work that we're doing within the Modern Slavery team. I think many of you will already know about the Modern Slavery team's support for victims and survivors who are currently in the NRM. And so Bali and Rose will put me right, but I think there are about 300, over 300 people currently being supported by the Modern Slavery team. These are victims in the NRM currently receiving support. What I do though in the engagement work is a little bit different. So I do the work pre-NRM, and it's a kind of like almost like a mini service within the bigger service, the Modern Slavery team. And it's funded differently in the sense that the NRM work is funded by the Salvation Army, and the work that I do is funded by the Office of the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner. The aim of the engagement work is to identify and help support adult females who are victims of modern slavery, trafficking within the sex trade. And it's throughout the whole of the West Midlands. So basically it's the West Midlands Police Force area. So that covers everything from Coventry, Birmingham, Walsall, Wolverhampton, Dudley, Sandwell. It's not a sex worker support service, although of course, day in, day out, we're engaging with sex workers, but it concentrates on the most extreme forms of exploitation within the sex trade. So these are women who are victims of modern slavery and or human trafficking. Now, I keep saying, and I will throughout this this talk, be referring to we. It's the kind of royal we, in fact, because since this project started 2 years ago, I've been the only person delivering it. So I've been sort of rushing around like a headless chicken for 2 years. But great news is that this year the PCC have expanded the funding that we received, and I've got a new colleague who's going to be starting right at the beginning of January, and I'm absolutely thrilled about this. And I hope she's as excited about it as I am, because it's going to really mean that we can do a lot more work and get involved in a lot more sort of projects that I think will deliver some great outcomes. In terms of the practicalities of identifying and supporting women in modern slavery and the sex trade, work really closely with the police. So this would be the Modern Slavery Exploitation Hub in police headquarters, and also neighbourhood teams who are absolutely crucial in the fight against modern slavery. And at the front line. So, for example, we would be doing accompanying police on when they execute a warrant on a brothel. We would be doing joint visits with police and also joint visits with partner agencies into brothels where we have concerns that there might be victims of modern slavery. We also work really closely with local authorities, with social workers, with people working in the health service, so for example GPs, also work with staff in accident and emergency departments in hospitals, and also increasingly with staff working in mental health services. In fact, in terms of the identification of victims, it's far more common to find someone who is disclosing exploitation when they have reached some kind of crisis point in their life. So, for example, when they're in hospital, when they've got problems with their health, or maybe where they have a mental health crisis. It's those points that we actually really engage with victims far more than when we actually go into a brothel, because very few women will disclose that they're being exploited at that point. So we can go in with the police and everyone in the brothel, women will be saying, yes, we're absolutely fine, we're doing this, we're consenting to this work. Later on, however, we might meet the same women who will tell a very different story once they're away from the brothel. So it's really important in this engagement work not to focus simply on just working with going into brothels and talking to, for example, to women who are currently working in those kind of conditions, but also to engage wider services. So, for example, mental health services, to make people aware. So, mental health specialists, making people aware of modern slavery and how a victim of modern slavery who's in the sex trade can present to them. And it's at those kind of points where, we do perhaps most of our work involves around that. Now, I want to say a few things about the sex trade sort of generally, because although we're looking at modern slavery, we have to be able to understand the sex trade as a whole in order to be able to say, well, there are these particular locations and individuals who are at most risk. And I think it's really astonishing to, when you start sort of like looking beyond the surface to see how big the sex trade is. It's also undergone a revolution in the last 20 years, because you'll probably, if you think back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the sex trade would be identified, quite clearly, sort of concentrated in particular areas. red light areas, or where there were, say for example, massage parlours and clubs. And there would be particular like streets, for example, that would be known as red light areas where women would be doing selling sex on the street. That's all changed. There are still those red light areas. There are still some places like the Hagley Road, the Soho Road, where you find women on the street sex working. But the vast majority of the trade is now done indoors, so on residential streets that you would never think that there would be a brothel on. There will be a brothel. It's all done behind nice curtains, and people will very rarely notice what's happening. And this is this has been enabled by the mobile phone and the internet. And there are websites that advertise women's sexual services. And they are, if anyone wanted to take a look at something like Viva Street, which is probably one of the most common ones, there are literally hundreds of ads. And just before this meeting started, I did a quick check to see that there, and I've got the numbers here. Today, there are 493 ads on Viva Street advertising sexual services of women in Birmingham alone. In Walsall, 97. And even in Sleepy Dudley, where, you'd think that there wouldn't be much of a trade, there are 32 ads, current ads, that is. I've mentioned that, the brothels will be in a residential street. You'll also find them in apartment blocks. Some of the really nice apartment blocks, for example, in Birmingham city centre, there are, literally dozens of brothels. And it's really hard for us to find out what is happening in those brothels. And the use of the internet as well to advertise women also means that it's very difficult to really know what's going on because it's hidden. I often think of the internet as a kind of firewall. It can help those women who are consenting sex workers because it helps them do, conduct their business, and they can, have better kind of like safety, if you like, because they can check clients, they can maintain their privacy more easily than they would have done 20 or 30 years ago when maybe they used to have to go and stand out on the streets. But the problem is that internet, that firewall which protects some women, also is a barrier behind which you can get organised crime, traffickers who basically are exploiting women. And it's really difficult for us to see what's going on. In terms of modern slavery in the sector, I just want to concentrate on sort of like particularly two areas where I see major problems in the region, and that is the trafficking of Romanian women. Now, a lot of this is done by organised crime. We find that the women are coming from impoverished communities in Romania, and women in desperation join the trade. Partly because there is virtually, there's no other way of making a living, an adequate living back home. So they come to the UK where they will sell sex and send money back home to support their families, to build a house and this kind of thing. But at the same time, they're also really vulnerable to exploitation. So often this trade in women, many of whom the women are consenting, shades into trafficking, and there are organised crime groups who basically bring women over from Romania. These women will often have been in the trade as victims of CSE from the age of 12 or 13. When they get to 18, they're then exported abroad throughout Europe, and some of them end up in the UK. And the trafficking networks that exploit them will be taking half their money, or sometimes, in some of the worst cases, all their money, and they have very little control over, for example, the clients they see or the sexual acts that they're required to do. The other area that is really concerning is the exploitation of young Chinese women, and we see this in particular in the large apartment blocks in the city centre, where you've got, apartments which you can't even see who is going into them. So it's very difficult to monitor. To give you an example, there was a police operation this is going back some time now, a few months ago, where there was a warrant executed and they went into the brothel in a really nice apartment block in Birmingham city centre, and there was a young Chinese woman there who basically was very clearly a victim of trafficking. She had no personal possessions of any value. The only things that she had with her was the outfit that she'd arrived in, and then a selection of lingerie. She had no phone. She had nothing of any value, and basically she was just there to service, any number of men who were managed by a kind of like a minder who monitored what she did and also took the money. The other victims of modern slavery that I see and that we can say most are young British women who are victims of grooming gangs and trafficking. And I find this is quite very, very difficult kind of to deal with, because many of the young women are consenting to what is happening to them because they think of the perpetrators as their friends. And within the media, there's been a great emphasis upon the victims of grooming gangs being young white women in care. From what I can see in the work that I do throughout the region, grooming gangs, trafficking, they target vulnerability, and basically ethnicity. It has really got nothing to do with it. So the people who are victimized in this way come from a range of ethnicities. A lot of the work that I do is dealing with really complex cases. So we have this idea in terms of trafficking that there is sort of an ideal victim. This would be a young woman who has no kind of like background within the sex trade, who's kidnapped and then forced into sexual slavery. In practice, I mean, there are those cases, but the vast majority of women who are exploited in the sex trade in this kind of way, or victims of modern slavery, have got really complex histories. And I wanted to give you a flavour of what I do and the complexity of this, of the kind of the cases that we'll work with. And it really will, I think it's good to concentrate on case studies, because we can really get a sense of how it works in practice. So the first case study would be, and this is quite recent, in a brothel within Birmingham, and in one of the lower levels of brothels. We met a young Romanian woman who she's in her early 20s. She's already got 4 children back in Romania. And she's clearly a victim of trafficking, because she said that she was told she was going to come to the UK. She was going to earn money for the family, for her husband and these four children, and that she was going to be picking vegetables. When she got here, however, she was put into a brothel, and she realized she had to do sex work, and she was basically forced into doing this because her husband said she had to send money back to feed the children. She came from a very poor family. The husband was also extremely abusive. She's a victim of domestic violence. The complexity of this comes, however, when she said, in response to the question to me, can we help you? We can take you out of this situation. You can be put into the NRM. We can put all the safeguarding in place around you. She said, actually, no, I want to stay here because I need to send the money back for my family to feed my children. But also, I feel safer here than I've ever felt at home, because as a victim of domestic violence, my husband used to beat me all the time, and he'd knocked her teeth out. And, she had a terrible life back in Romania. So if she had to choose between living in Romania and being a victim of domestic violence and living in the UK in a really horrible brothel, she would prefer to live in the brothel. The second example I wanted to give you was the example, and this is a really actually a good news story. This is a woman who, a Polish woman, who was found in an apartment block in Birmingham city centre by an ambulance crew. So someone had called the ambulance, but When they arrived, there was no one around, but they thought it was a bit of an odd flat that they'd picked her up from. They took her to hospital. She was very, very seriously ill. She was in intensive care. They thought she was going to die. She was in intensive care for several days. And the key thing here was that the staff in the hospital thought there was something strange, and they began to think that maybe she was a victim of sexual exploitation. And as a result of that, as a result of their sort of, awareness of modern slavery, they got safeguarding at the hospital involved. They got the police involved, and they got myself involved. And it's a bit of like a team effort, this was. And the result of this like combined effort, and especially the work of the hospital staff in supporting this young woman, over a period of a few weeks, she began to talk. And when initially she said she wasn't a victim of sexual exploitation, she gradually began to tell the story of trafficking from her home country around Europe and into the UK. She subsequently was put into the NRM, and she's been safeguarded. She's in a safe house, similar to our own Black Country Women's Aid safe house for trafficked women, but somewhere else in the UK. And it's a good news story because I know, several months on that she's doing incredibly well. And the reason I wanted to give this example was that it's an example really of combined working, different agencies working, the hospital staff who were aware of modern slavery, the safeguarding staff at the hospital, the police, and also myself. And without that joint working, I think, and also the awareness of modern slavery in the sex trade, maybe that young woman would have gone back to her traffickers, because when she was in hospital, as soon as she was in hospital, she started having visits from people who were supposedly her friends bringing her presents and things. They were actually the traffickers, and the hospital had the good sense to stop those visits. So I wanted to end on a good note, to talk about the kind of complexities of the case, but how also by working together, we can change people's lives, and we can, really help people come out of this situation and escape the worst elements of the sex trade. The other thing to say is, from all of you at Black Country Women's Aid, I often don't get to see you very, very often, only a few of you now and again. If you ever have clients that you think might be victims of modern slavery who could be sexually exploited, please get in touch with me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. That was a really, really good insight into work that not many people would undertake, actually. So thank you very much indeed. Before I ask the team to press play for some of the other presentations we've got at the end, and I do hope you'll be able to carry on, I want to thank a number of people. I'd like to thank Sarah Ward and her excellent team. She does amazing work. They work all sorts of hours, and it's been a particularly difficult year this year. I want to thank all the volunteers who add such incredible value to the work we do. Also to the wonderful people who support our charity in raising funds and donating gifts. That touch of sparkle to the work that the charity does. We couldn't do any of this alone, and together we make a difference. Big thank you as well to all our wonderful staff who've worked so hard over the last year, and I know I'm straying into this year instead of finishing in 19. Hopefully you've got a taste of just how complex our organisation is. We have 42 different contracts spanning all sorts of different services, and I would highly recommend that you do have a quick look. I don't suppose you want to read word for word, but a quick look through our annual report, which will give you a flavour of the complexities of what we do. So despite an incredible and difficult times, the support we get never ceases to amaze me. People's kindness and generosity around the Black Country, and often areas of the Black Country, people don't have a lot of money or time, but give it without thought to our services. And at Christmas with COVID, many of our supporters are already sending gifts in for our families to make Christmas in this very difficult time for all of us a success. So a big thank you to you all. If you need reminding of our numbers to contact, we have slides at the end of the final partnership presentations. And I really hope that this time next year we'll be face to face and I won't have to read a script to make sure all our slides arrive in time, and have an enjoyable festive season, and a happy new year, and please all stay safe. Thank you very much indeed. So enough from me, and enjoy our following recordings from our excellent partners.
My name is Sue Wilson. I'm named nurse for Safeguarding Children, Sandwell and West Birmingham Hospital. How do we know Black Country Women's Aid? We've worked in partnership for the last 5 years, which began with the ED IDVA project, which has now become an embedded service within ED with sustainable funding. What contribution does Black Country Women's Aid make to the strategic agenda? In terms of meeting the outcomes for Safer Sandwell Partnership, in terms of the prevention of violence and exploitation, it meets that agenda. In terms of the NICE guidance and the recommendations of how health tackle domestic violence and abuse, and the recommendations from the Pathfinder Toolkit in terms of ED having health-based IDVAs. How important is Black Country Women's Aid in supporting victims? The ED service has transformed the way clinicians address domestic violence within the ED department, addressing it with more of a social model than a medical model. The IDVAs are absolutely invaluable in terms of the crisis intervention and the onward referrals that they give to victims and the support they give to staff. In terms of the future working together, the parameters of our partnership working will evolve in the coming months, but I'm absolutely confident that we have that shared vision to continue to address domestic violence as the public health issue it undoubtedly is.
Hello, I'm Isabel McFarlane from the Salvation Army. I look after awareness raising around modern slavery work. I've worked with Black Country Women's Aid for a number of years now, and you guys have always been amazingly responsive when it comes to supporting us in these activities, whether that is finding one of your clients who is willing to share their story anonymously with the media to raise awareness, or in supporting our things like our hashtag We're Not For Sale tattoo and face mask campaigns to help people understand that modern slavery is a reality, what they can do to help stamp it out, and by helping us with your clients' stories, with survivors' stories, really making people understand the personal impact of this hideous crime. We couldn't have done a lot of the things that we've done without Black Country Women's Aid, so we're really grateful to you and look forward to carrying on working in that way in the future.
Hello, my name's Neil Parks. I used to be a commissioner in Sandwell for public health. I spent about 25 years of my working life in Sandwell, so I'm aware of the work of Black Country Women's Aid, and I know Sarah from the Community Safety Partnership in Sandwell. A couple of years ago, I was involved with Black Country Women's Aid and the Salvation Army in a report that looked at connections between modern slavery and substance misuse. More recently, I've been working with the Salvation Army and Black Country Women's Aid to look at pathways into healthcare for victims and how we might make this better by working across boundaries in partnership. I'm really proud to be associated with Black Country Women's Aid, and I'm very aware of their excellent record in innovation and working in partnership across the Black Country. So thank you for inviting me to the AGM, and I hope the day goes really well. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Kirsty Hart and I manage the Bright Future programme, which supports survivors of modern day slavery into supported work placements with the possibility for a permanent position with the business that's hosting them following their placement. And the way that it works is we work with a number of different business partners across the country, and then also a number of different charity partners across the country. Those charities will refer their clients into the Bright Future programme, and then it's then our job to match them up to a suitable work placement with one of the business partners. So Black Country Women's Aid is one of our referral partners. We've been working with them in this capacity for 2-3 years now. It's always been a real pleasure working with them, and what I can see from all the interactions that I do have with them is just their heart to see their clients fully restored, to have them in sustained employment so that they're living this life of independence, and to be just in meaningful employment where they are no longer needing the support of Black Country Women's Aid, but instead living life independently. The support of Black Country Women's Aid is absolutely essential throughout the Bright Future placement. So of course we need our businesses to offer the placements, but we really need the support of the charities to walk alongside the candidate in their first 4 weeks of the placement. Of course, for a lot of the survivors, this might be their first ever official employment, or it might be the first time that they're in employment following their trafficking situation. So there unfortunately are lots of opportunities for things to be re-triggered, and they might not have ever been taught kind of professional boundaries, lines of communication within the workplace. So we're just so grateful for Black Country Women's Aid that they really come alongside their clients in this process and help to iron out any of those issues by directly communicating with their line managers, and just really getting to the root of any issues that may come up. So yes, I'm very much looking forward to working more with Black Country Women's Aid and supporting more of their clients to achieve sustained employment and lasting freedom.
My name is Naz Akhtar and I work for DWP as a partnership manager for the Black Country District. Addressing the issue of domestic abuse is a priority policy area for DWP, and Women's Aid is a national strategic partner. Currently, we are promoting the campaign Making DWP a Safe Place for Those Experiencing Domestic Abuse from the 25th of November to the 10th of December 2020. The 16 Days of Action is a national campaign against domestic abuse which aims to raise awareness for employers and support businesses to take action against domestic abuse. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody at Black Country Women's Aid, the staff members, their service users, and I look forward to continue this collaborative working. And from myself and the Black Country District team, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
My name is Melanie Watkins. I work for Sandwell NBC. I'm a neighbourhood officer working for the Rowley Regis area, managing the Blackheath ward. I'm responsible for tenancy management of the housing stock and work alongside ward councillors within the neighbourhood. During lockdown, I have built up a relationship with Debbie Worth to better support the families that have approached suffering from domestic abuse at this difficult time. Usually I would be accessible in a local office, but due to the pandemic, I've been providing the service agile, meaning lots of phone conversations. I had a lady contact me who had fled emotional, domestic and financial abuse that she'd been suffering many years. She was placed in temporary accommodation, and as a joint tenant, it was my responsibility to deal with finding alternative accommodation. She really struggled due to lockdown, leaving a controlling environment and walking straight into another one. She gave me Debbie's number and asked me to speak to her to get information I needed. I'm so glad she did, because I've had far more contact from residents experiencing domestic incidents while in lockdown, and Debbie's support has been invaluable. I've probably pestered her to death, but she's always been on the end of the phone listening to me and offering support and guidance for my girls. The service Black Country Women's Aid gives is vital, and I know my lady in temporary accommodation would have really struggled without the contact. She had no one to turn to and no one to talk to, and really appreciated Debbie's encouraging conversations. I'm hoping to build on the relationship I have built up with Debbie to better support sufferers of domestic abuse find alternative accommodation to help them to rebuild their lives.
So my name's Helen Billings. I'm the Family Safeguarding Programme Lead for Walsall Metropolitan Borough Council. And I am doing a piece of work with Black Country Women's Aid around family safeguarding. It's funded by the Department of Education, and Walsall is one of 5 local authorities to be doing this work. It was developed in Hertfordshire, and at its heart it's about keeping families together. Who knew if you support parents, the children do better? Black Country Women's Aid have enabled us to have 4 workers who are co-located with our social work teams alongside mental health professionals and substance abuse professionals to really support those families to do better. And for me, the real contribution of this partnership has been the expertise around domestic abuse, because it's one of those topics where everybody's got an opinion and everyone's got a theory, but not everybody has the expertise. And I've really valued some in-depth conversations about some of the complex and subtle things that crop up with colleagues at Black Country Women's Aid. The other thing for me about the partnership is around the practicalities of making it work. You have to keep talking to each other, you have to make sure the forms fit in, you have to make sure the staff are happy, and keeping up with those very practical things is something that Black Country Women's Aid have done particularly well with Walsall. I think, though, that the most important thing that Black Country Women's Aid contribute is that advocacy and that woman's voice, because those of us in statutory organisations, health, local authority, police, can sometimes lose our focus with the women, the victims, and that's where Black Country Women's Aid really come into their own. They hold us to account and keep us real. Thank you.
Hello all, my name's Kath Hannon. I'm a strategic board member for David Jamieson, who's West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner. Part of my responsibilities is to improve services for victims of crime across the West Midlands region. So for the past 7 years, I've worked with Black Country Women's Aid as part of a network of organisations who help victims and families cope and recover from the trauma of crime. Black Country Women's Aid, yourselves have always been at the forefront of change and making a significant contribution to safeguarding those who are vulnerable. Now let me show you a little bit about what partnership working is all about. So I need you all to stand up. I know you'll be at home or you might be in an office somewhere, so come on, get up out of your chair. No, you, yeah, I can see you, all of you, up now, right? And I want you to put your hands in the air like you don't care. And I want you to stamp your feet, and I want you, if you can, to shout out loud. And I want you to shout, Black Country Women's Aid is brilliant. So on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Black Country Women's Aid is brilliant, yay! So you should feel a little bit breathless, a little bit excited, and just a little bit giddy. And partnership working is a bit like that. Well, sometimes it's a bit like that. You might have a plan, but you have to trust that your other partners are willing to be flexible, willing to be challenging, but also travel the same path as yourself because you're trying to achieve the same things. So it can be a bit breathless. It needs to be challenging because that's the best thing about partnership working. There might be an idea, but everybody's got like a little piece of that jigsaw. So whatever picture it starts off as, it becomes something completely different. And very often it's something really significant and brilliant, and it couldn't come together without that partnership work. Black Country Women's Aid has stood the test of time and continues to forge forward, making changes to keep people safe. I'm very proud of the work you do and your commitment to looking after others, and I personally want to thank you for that, and also thank you on behalf of the Police and Crime Commissioner. You're wonderful people, and don't let anybody ever tell you anything different. So I wish you all a wonderful Christmas and a very happy New Year, and I look forward to working with you in 2021 and beyond.